There are moments in the world of intelligence when an operation is so precise, so impossibly clean, that even seasoned analysts pause. A quiet residential block in Beirut woke up one morning to find that a single apartment had vanished from inside a building that still stood solidly on its foundations. Neighbors stepped into hallways expecting to see chaos, but the corridors were untouched. The walls, the staircases, the doors of every other flat remained exactly as they were the night before. Only one room, deep inside the structure, had been carved out with absolute accuracy, leaving a hollow space where a man once lived. For many observers, the question was immediate. How could anyone strike a target buried inside the dense heart of a city known for its layered neighborhoods, narrow passages, and constant civilian movement? And not just any target, but a man who existed almost as a shadow, someone who never carried a phone, never visited the same place twice, and never allowed a pattern to form around him. The kind of figure whose survival depended on being unpredictable in a world where predictability meant death. This was the elimination of the man who served as the operational brain of one of the most fortified groups in the Middle East. He was a careful planner, a silent mover, and a man surrounded by guards trained to spot the smallest hint of surveillance. Yet, even with all this protection, a single strike found him with surgical accuracy. So the mystery begins with a simple but haunting question. How do you hunt someone who refuses to leave a trail? How do you locate a man who has turned disappearance into a lifestyle? And how do you deliver a strike so precise that the structure around him survives untouched? To understand that, we need to step into a hidden contest between intelligence services, where information becomes the most dangerous weapon, and where a single clue, barely visible, can alter the balance of an entire region. To understand how this operation became possible, we need to step into a conflict that does not appear on maps or in official declarations. It is a long-running shadow war between two forces that study each other relentlessly. For years, Israel and Hezbollah have engaged in a contest where silence often speaks louder than open confrontation, and where the most decisive blows are delivered without warning, witness, or public acknowledgement. It is a rivalry shaped not only by ideology and geography, but by an evolving contest of intelligence, patience, and technological mastery. Beirut has always been a difficult city for surveillance. Its packed streets, layered buildings, and constant human movement create a natural shield for anyone who understands how to disappear within it. Every block has its own rhythm. Every alley has its own pulse. Outsiders struggle to blend in without drawing attention. Digital tools lose their clarity in a place where signal interference, crowded infrastructure, and overlapping networks create a fog that even advanced systems struggle to penetrate. Inside this environment, Hezbollah built a stronghold of information control. The group does not simply depend on physical defenses. It shapes entire neighborhoods through loyalty, influence, and fear. Safehouses blend into ordinary apartment blocks. Operational meetings take place in locations that appear completely mundane, and the group's leaders are surrounded by layers of watchers, informants, counterintelligence teams, and local supporters who quickly spot anything out of the ordinary. For Israel's intelligence services, finding a high-value individual inside such a world is almost like attempting to isolate a single drop of water in the ocean. Traditional surveillance loses its meaning when the target travels without digital footprints. Human sources face danger from the moment they make eye contact with the wrong person. Even satellite tracking becomes nearly useless in areas where movement is chaotic and buildings overlap like a maze. Yet the war between these two forces has never been defined by brute strength alone. It has evolved into a competition of discovery, where the smallest hint can expose the most carefully hidden figure. Behind every public confrontation lies an unseen struggle to observe without being observed, to act without being detected, and to understand the enemy at a depth where even their silence becomes a clue. It is within this silent battlefield that the operation in Beirut took shape, long before the strike itself. To reach the man at the center of it, we must first understand who he was, how he lived, and why the world considered him one of the most elusive figures in modern conflict. The man at the center of this operation was known among intelligence circles as someone who understood the value of invisibility. He had risen through the ranks of his organization not because he sought the spotlight, but because he perfected the art of staying outside it. He was the architect behind several complex operations, a strategist who wove plans through networks that stretched across borders, and a figure whose movements were whispered rather than announced. He had mastered unpredictability to the point where even those around him rarely knew his next step. He avoided phones entirely, treating them as traps. He shifted sleeping locations every night, refusing to return to the same place twice in a row. He held meetings in different apartments, different floors, sometimes even different blocks, so that no pattern would betray him. To the outside world, he almost did not exist. But inside his organization, he was the quiet force that coordinated logistics, intelligence, and operations with calm precision. His security arrangements were designed not just to protect him, but to ensure that anyone looking for him was forced into a maze. He moved with multiple convoys, each designed to mislead potential trackers. Decoy vehicles drove ahead and behind, sometimes splitting off into different streets to create confusion. Security teams swept areas long before he arrived, and when he did enter a location, it instantly became a controlled environment. Phones were banned, curtains were drawn, windows were sealed. Signal jammers were activated to choke off digital tracking attempts. The men who protected him were not ordinary guards. They were trusted loyalists who had served with him for years, men who could identify an unfamiliar face in a crowd with a single glance. They operated with discipline, rotating shifts, scanning rooftops, and watching shadows for any sign of an outsider. Anyone attempting to get close faced an environment where even the smallest mistake could be fatal. Inside this world of strict discipline and constant motion, the man built a life defined by caution. Yet his influence stretched far beyond the rooms he occupied. Multiple countries monitored his activities for years, each aware that his decisions shaped events across the region. He was considered a high-value individual whose capture or removal could shift political calculations and security strategies on several fronts. This combination of invisibility, operational skill, and strategic importance made him one of the most challenging individuals in the Middle East to track. Finding him required more than surveillance. It required understanding the world he created around himself, the subtle ripples his presence left in places he stayed, and the hidden marks of a man who tried to leave none. To close in on someone who lived like this, Mossad had to look for something entirely different. Not a person, but an invisible signature that he never intended to reveal. When conventional tracking fails, intelligence agencies are forced to look for what a target cannot hide. In this case, the man's greatest strength, his refusal to leave a personal trail, created an unexpected vulnerability. To remain invisible, he had to alter his environment everywhere he went. And those alterations, subtle and easily overlooked, formed a kind of invisible signature that only the most patient observers could detect. Mossad understood that chasing him directly would lead nowhere. He left no digital footprints, no travel patterns, and no routine that could be mapped. But every location he entered had to change to accommodate his security rules. These changes were small, scattered across different places, and meaningless when seen individually. Yet, when placed side by side, they began to form a quiet, consistent pattern. Electricity usage would rise unexpectedly in an apartment block on a night when he arrived. Curtains that were normally left open would be drawn at unusual hours, sometimes just before dawn. Street sweepers would appear on the same day every week, on a road that usually saw irregular maintenance. Signal jammers would activate near a building just long enough to cut off phone reception for a few minutes. A pair of guards, known within the inner circle, would be seen standing casually on a balcony that previously had no security presence at all. Individually, none of these events pointed to anything. Collectively, they painted a faint outline of movement, one that existed in the environment rather than in the man himself. Mossad began to look not at the target, but at the ripples he left behind. They monitored fluctuations in power grids, unusual building maintenance schedules, and sudden restrictions in small pockets of Beirut. They studied patterns of light and sound, the rhythm of certain streets, and the flow of people entering and leaving specific complexes. With enough time, something remarkable emerged. The man who refused to leave a trail was leaving one without realizing it. He had created a world around himself that could not operate normally whenever he entered it. By identifying these distortions, Mossad could narrow down the number of buildings he might be visiting. They could observe which areas reacted strangely at night, which blocks went dark at unexpected times, and which apartments experienced irregular activity just long enough to accommodate a brief stay. This was the breakthrough. They would not track the man, they would track the world he disrupted, and by doing so, they began closing in on the exact locations where he passed through the shadows, unaware that the environment itself was revealing his presence. Once Mossad identified the subtle disruptions left behind by the target, the real challenge began. Those environmental clues were not consistent, not predictable, and not easy for analysts to interpret. Each distortion was like a whisper, buried under layers of city noise, and Beirut, with its packed neighborhoods and overlapping signals, made those whispers almost impossible to separate from ordinary life. This is where a new intelligence tool quietly entered the picture. It was an analytical system built not to follow a person, but to understand human behavior at a scale too large for any team of officers. It studied power usage, signal patterns, traffic rhythms, and even the timing of basic activities across entire districts. Instead of looking for a face, it looked for anomalies. It analyzed deviations in everyday routines, comparing the normal flow of the city to the strange pauses and spikes created by a single individual who moved with heavy security. This system did not rely on traditional surveillance. It did not need cameras or intercepted messages. It was trained to recognize patterns that were barely visible. For example, when a certain alley went silent at a time, it was usually busy, or when lights flickered in a sequence that matched earlier safe houses linked to the same network. Even details that seemed unrelated, such as a sudden drop in access point signals or a cleaning crew appearing too many times in 1 week, were recorded and processed. The key advantage of this system was its patience. It could monitor a wide region without fatigue, without distraction, and without risk of exposure. Over time, it created a behavioral map of the areas most commonly altered by the target's presence. It identified 3 buildings in the southwestern part of the city where the environmental disruptions repeated with unusual precision. These buildings were not connected by appearance or layout. They were chosen to avoid patterns. Yet, the system noticed that each location experienced the same strange pulses in its surroundings. That consistency, hidden beneath layers of misdirection, could only point to one thing. Once this short list emerged, the operation shifted from broad analysis to close observation. The system had pointed the way, but confirming the target required something human. Field agents, operating under deep cover, began quietly weaving themselves into the fabric of the neighborhood. They watched the entrances, the balconies, and the movement of guards. They studied which windows were sealed, which doors stayed locked, and which pathways were subtly redirected by men who never stood still for long. Eventually, one detail stood out. 2 men, known from earlier intelligence, appeared briefly at a balcony in one of the short-listed buildings. They were part of the inner protective circle, men who only accompanied the target when he was physically present. Their brief appearance was enough to tilt the balance. For the first time in months, Mossad had a specific location that matched both digital analysis and human observation. The shadow they had chased for so long was finally standing inside an apartment whose walls could be pointed to, mapped, and confirmed. But even with this knowledge, the operation was far from complete. The building stood in a densely populated neighborhood, packed tightly with families, children, and ordinary residents who had no connection to the hidden world unfolding above them. A large strike was out of the question. A conventional raid was too risky. Any mistake could ignite a regional crisis. Mossad needed a way to see inside the room without being noticed, and only then could the final stage begin. The next move required something small, quiet, and impossible to detect. Once the likely apartment had been identified, the search for confirmation entered its most fragile phase. The target operated inside a bubble of caution. Even a slight disturbance outside the building could alert his security team. Any unusual movement on the street, any unfamiliar face, any change in the flow of the neighborhood could cause him to shift locations instantly. Mossad needed certainty, but achieving it without exposing the operation required a tool that would leave no trace. What arrived above the building was not a large drone, not a machine that cast a shadow or hummed loudly through the air. It was something far smaller, designed to blend into the rhythms of city life. Its shape resembled a small bird. Its movement followed natural patterns, drifting with the breeze, pausing occasionally on ledges, and avoiding the straight mechanical lines that usually betray technology. For anyone who looked up, it would seem like another harmless part of the sky. This little machine carried only one purpose. It needed to see inside the apartment long enough to confirm whether the man they had spent months tracking was truly there. Its camera was small, its signal encrypted, and its flight path carefully pre-programmed to avoid drawing attention. It approached the building slowly, weaving through balconies and wires, moving in a way that made it appear almost casual. Below, the target's guards stood in their usual positions, confident in their layers of security. They watched the street, scanned the alley, and monitored the building entrance. They looked for threats that came from the ground or from obvious air routes. They were not prepared for something that mimicked the natural world so closely that it did not register as a threat at all. When the drone reached the target's balcony, it paused just long enough to capture the images needed. Inside the apartment, the man was seated near a small table, speaking with two of his associates. The moment the confirmation was transmitted, the drone drifted away, disappearing into the tangle of rooftops and wires. For Mossad, this was the turning point. They now knew the exact room, the exact position, and the exact moment when the target was inside. The little machine had done its job quietly, without triggering alarms or disturbing the neighborhood. But confirming the target was only half the challenge. The next step required something far more difficult. A strike needed to be executed inside one of the most tightly packed residential zones of the city, surrounded by families who had no idea they were living next to a high-value individual. The attack had to be precise, silent until the moment of impact, and controlled to avoid harming anyone outside the single room where the target sat. The question was not whether Mossad could hit the building. The question was whether they could hit only the room, leaving the rest of the structure standing. To achieve that, they had to rely on a method refined through years of operations, guided by intelligence, calibration, and a level of precision that would determine the difference between success and failure. With the target confirmed inside the safe house, the final stage of the operation moved into motion. What came next was not a large-scale assault, not a barrage of missiles, and not the kind of airstrike that lights up a skyline. The challenge was far more delicate. The apartment sat inside a building filled with families, children, elderly residents, and ordinary people who had nothing to do with the hidden conflict unfolding above their heads. Any misjudgment, even by a fraction, could turn a precise operation into a tragedy. Mossad and the Air Force planners understood the stakes. They needed a strike that would collapse a single room without disturbing the floors above or below. They needed a munition that would enter quietly, detonate with controlled force, and neutralize only the individuals inside. The weapon selected for this task was engineered for such environments. It was small, guided by layers of intelligence, and capable of hitting a single apartment inside a crowded building without causing structural collapse to the rest. The aircrew involved in this mission did not rely solely on digital coordinates. They cross-checked visual markers, structural layouts, and the exact position of the balcony seen by the small drone. They identified the angle that would allow a direct hit into the apartment while minimizing shock to the surrounding walls. Every detail was measured and rehearsed, from the flight path of the aircraft to the timing of the release. When the strike was launched, there was no dramatic roar across the city. There was only a brief moment when a quiet object sliced through the night, guided by satellite data and real-time intelligence. It traveled precisely toward the small section of the building where the target was seated. For residents in nearby apartments, there was barely enough time to register that anything unusual was happening. The munition entered the apartment almost surgically. Inside, the blast was contained to that single unit, causing the walls to collapse inward and ending the meeting in an instant. The surrounding rooms remained intact. Windows in adjacent apartments rattled but did not shatter. People in the building later described feeling a sudden jolt, followed by silence. When the smoke settled, the structure stood almost unchanged. Only one apartment, the one Mossad had spent months painstakingly tracking, was destroyed. The target, the guards, and the 2 associates inside were eliminated. No one else in the building was harmed. Outside, the street remained calm. Children sleeping in nearby rooms did not wake. Families eating late dinners heard a distant thump but saw no flames, no collapse, and no firefighters rushing in. The city, accustomed to louder conflicts, barely reacted in the first few minutes. It was only when emergency teams arrived and confirmed the precision of the damage that the magnitude of the operation became clear. Intelligence officials around the world quietly noted what they were seeing. This was not simply another targeted strike. It represented a level of accuracy that pushed the boundaries of modern covert warfare. It blended human intelligence, machine analysis, and aerial capability into a single moment where everything worked perfectly. But even as the operation concluded, questions began forming far beyond the site. Why had the target been there that night? How had the intelligence tracked him in ways that evaded his decades of experience? And what would the fallout be in the days to come? The answers would shape regional calculations, draw global attention, and open debates about the new frontier of precision operations. In the hours that followed, the city woke to a quiet tension. News began to circulate through Beirut's narrow streets, but with more questions than answers. Residents spoke of a strange collapse inside a single apartment. Some assumed it was a gas leak. Others thought it was an isolated explosion. No one understood how a single room could vanish without damaging the rest of the structure. The building stood almost unchanged, an unsettling reminder that something unusual had happened in the middle of an ordinary neighborhood. As word spread, the organization began piecing together the reality. Their chief strategist, the man responsible for key operations, had been eliminated in a place considered secure beyond doubt. His routines were designed to be unpredictable. His security rotated constantly. His presence inside any building was meant to be undetectable. Yet someone had not only found him, but had struck him with near mathematical precision. Inside their inner circle, disbelief slowly turned into a sense of exposure. If the enemy could locate a man who changed sleeping locations every night, then no one was truly hidden. Meetings were postponed, convoys were rerouted, communications were reduced to the bare minimum. Senior members moved farther underground, each of them wondering whether the next subtle disruption in their surroundings would point to them as well. Across the region, observers and analysts tried to understand how the operation had been carried out. They examined satellite images, studied the damage pattern, and reviewed footage that showed only a brief flash followed by a controlled collapse. Many concluded that this was a demonstration rather than a strike. It sent a message that technology could now isolate a single room in a crowded block and eliminate its occupants without harming those nearby. For the intelligence world, it marked a shift. Traditional surveillance, with its dependence on physical tails and intercepted calls, was giving way to a new era where behavior, environment, and micro-patterns were as revealing as any direct signal. The invisible clues that people left behind simply by existing had become part of the battlefield. Yet, with every advancement came a deeper moral weight. The precision saved lives that night, but it also raised questions about the growing reach of invisible tools. If a hidden figure inside a crowded city could be located through ripples in routine, then the boundaries of privacy, sovereignty, and urban safety would continue to blur. The strike showed what was possible. The aftermath forced everyone to consider what it meant. But for those inside the operation, the mission was only one part of a wider pattern. The region had entered a phase defined by intelligence, misdirection, and rapid adaptation. This was not a single event. It was a signal of how conflicts would be shaped in the years ahead. As the city returned to its usual rhythm, the story of the strike slowly faded from public conversation. The building was cleaned. The street resumed its nightly traffic. The neighborhood returned to normal, even though it carried the invisible memory of what had taken place above it. And like many operations in this clandestine world, the impact was felt far more deeply in hidden rooms, war rooms, and intelligence briefings than on the street where the strike had occurred. The ordinary world settled again, unaware of the layers beneath the surface. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and watching more deep dive explorations of global intelligence and covert history. The aircraft approached Beirut silently, guided by real-time intelligence. Its munition wasn't meant to level a building, only to collapse a single room. A precision slice warhead, engineered to cut through concrete without triggering a chain reaction. Timing was everything. The target had to be inside, alone, and stationary. When the strike came, it was a single, surgical detonation. One apartment imploded inward. The walls around it remained untouched. No fireball, no shockwave tearing through floors, just one room erased from the night. On the ground, confusion spread instantly. The building still stood, but one apartment had been hollowed out like a missing tooth. Residents stared upward, unable to comprehend how a strike could carve a void with such precision. Security experts inspected the blast radius and found nothing familiar. Hezbollah reacted with anger and unease, confirming the death but hiding the gaps in their own counterintelligence. The strike revealed how deeply their networks had been penetrated and how vulnerable they remained. The intelligence war intensified overnight. Across the world, analysts tried to piece together the operation. How was the target tracked? How was the timing perfect? Theories multiplied. Micro-behavior monitoring, signal anomalies, movement patterns invisible to ordinary surveillance. Yet, every explanation raised more questions. Mossad seemed to turn scattered indicators, routine habits, background noise, fleeting signals into a live, dynamic map. Outsiders struggled because the method relied on fragments no one else would bother to collect, let alone fuse in real time. The strike wasn't just an isolated action, it signaled a new era. AI-enhanced pattern recognition, sharpened human intelligence, and pinpoint weapons now allow states to act with scalpel-like precision. Major powers watched closely. Some admired the technique, others feared it. Behind closed doors, defense labs and intelligence agencies quietly began developing similar capabilities. Modern statecraft is shifting from broad force operations to invisible, algorithmic targeting silent decisions shaping global power. Ultra-precise targeted killing raises disturbing questions. If technology can isolate one life inside a crowded city, what becomes of accountability? Civilians may feel safer geographically, yet the invisible systems deciding life and death rely on patterns, probabilities, and machine-filtered judgments. Nations justify it in the name of security, but the ethics grow heavier. Where is the line between protection and unchecked power? In this future, morality moves as quietly as the drones that enforce it. By sunrise, Beirut looked unchanged. Families walked the streets, Shops opened, traffic hummed through the morning light. Life continued, unaware that an intelligence battle had played out above them only hours before a silent clash shaping the world's balance of power. These hidden contests define modern politics more than speeches or treaties. And as you reflect on this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.